Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
There's no way around the fact that you have two stacks of margin. There's literally no way. And I think that is where Amazon has that waiting game. Where they're saying in that, like, look, maybe brands like you, but in the long term, economics will win and service levels will win. And that's been Amazon's bet for 15 years, and it's a pretty good bet.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. This episode, we welcome Rick Watson, founder and CEO of RMW Commerce Consulting, a firm Rick founded after spending 20 plus years as a technology entrepreneur and operator in the e-commerce industry, working with companies like ChannelAdvisor, where he was employee number one, and which was just acquired this week by CommerceHub, we'll get into in a few minutes, Barnes & Noble, and Pitney Bowes, to name a few. He's deservingly known as a thought leader and subject matter expert in the e-commerce space, host of his own podcast, The Watson Weekly, and sought after guest to just about every e-commerce podcast there is. Rick, it's an absolute pleasure to have you, and welcome to the eCom Logistics Podcast.
Thanks so much, Dan and Nanad. Really happy to be on with two such great supply chain professionals.
Thank you,
Thank
buddy.
you. And I to the intro, I just got to add, the guy that's not afraid to say things that we are all thinking online.
Yes.
Because I'm like, did Rick just say that? Yes, he did. Right? LinkedIn, the presence on LinkedIn specifically, that's where I get most of my Rick fix, let's call it, right?
The unfiltered Rick. Yes, we love it.
Exactly. Did he just say that? I was just thinking about it, but I didn't want to say it, but he just did. So
no, that's great. Rick. I mean, for me, it's there's a value in being independent that I think most people don't appreciate. And I didn't learn that when I was at ChannelAdvisor for 10 years. And I was an employee, and it was very much that, there are certain things you can say and you can't say, if you work for Amazon, if you work for Target. I went to work for Barnes & Noble, and I realized that when I was there, no one was caring about Barnes & Noble. Everyone had already written them off. So I could write on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or I could say whatever I wanted, and no one really cared. Yes. There wasn't any corporate PR, filtering me. And that was just something I remembered at the time. It's like, that's like a cool thing to be able to do, to say what you feel, because it's rare. And I think I've kind of taken that with me when I started my own business. Now I am truly independent. Look, I have customers. I don't truly, it's not my job, and it's certainly not my intention to upset anyone. I try to never say anything that I wouldn't tell someone if I were in the same room with them, even if I'm speaking directly about the company, even if it's critical feedback. I try not to say it in a malicious or hurtful way at all.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? It's all B2B. We are working with the giants within the e-com space. And then there is this large pool of merchants, right? All we are trying to do is speak on behalf of the merchants to say what makes sense for you when it comes to all of these new strategies being deployed by all of these companies that are out there. And it's not against a company or otherwise, right? It's more to do with how does the merchant succeed and navigate through the complexities of e-commerce. So thank you for doing the service, Mike.
Yeah, that's great.
So maybe, Rick, we could jump into, ChannelAdvisor, who you just mentioned. I thought it was really interesting doing the research that you were employee number one. So obviously they're on the early days ground floor, and I don't know if you still have some stock options. Maybe you were excited this week, but wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously the news that they were acquired by CommerceHub. Looks like that was for roughly, somewhere around $663 million. And just curious about your thoughts and how you see this playing out in the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have any stock, and they went public in 2013, and within a couple of years after, I think I sold my stock. But kind of the early shares, long ago were the most valuable ones in any event. But no, it was exciting to see it. And I think the biggest thing is ChannelAdvisor seems like it's been for sale for a little while now. And when I say for sale, it's not like they were actively in a hurry to sell, but I think they were actively trying to find the right partner. And again, this is not something sort of like publicly out there or not, and it may not be 100% true, but I think it's close to true that they were trying to look for the right strategic fit for the business, because I don't think, was ChannelAdvisor going to be a public independent company for the next 10 years? Probably not. And I think the one thing that, particularly the CEO, David Spitz, who actually worked for back when I was there, before he was even CEO there, he started as director of business development at ChannelAdvisor when he came on, and he was running product management, and I was the director of product management. So I got to meet with him every day, every week. And think of David Spitz as like Warren Buffett. That's how he thinks about the world. He thinks about value. He thinks about long-term shareholder value. He thinks about long-term profitability. And the beautiful thing about that way of thinking is it gives him optionality, which means like he doesn't have to be in a hurry to find the right partner. He can afford to wait for the right player. And I think 95% of the startup world does not think this way. They're like, oh, we're just going to spend another 20 points. I mean, you saw Avalara got, the darling. Everyone needs Avalara. But what's the secret of Avalara? It's not a secret. They're losing 25, for every $100 they make, they're losing $125. Period. ChannelAdvisor is not in the same, bucket by any stretch of the imagination. Yet one company is growing at 35% year over year, and ChannelAdvisor is growing at 15% year over year. And that 20% difference is the VC narrative. That entire thing is a VC narrative. So I think that's the starting point before.
Exactly. It's burning your cash, right?
To me, that's the backdrop of the entire conversation before we even start talking about CommerceHub or this or that.
Yeah. Though from a ChannelAdvisor perspective, like I've been close to it. I've used the product, right? And definitely you built the product, leading product development or, product management on that side. I do feel from a technical perspective, it needs modernization, right? That it has not gone through. It feels a bit dated. Of course, it can do this at a mass scale. It has a lot under the hood, but there is modernization. So I really hope like whatever happens with CommerceHub, there is a little bit additional product development cash infusion that goes into it and evolves the product to the maturity that it requires in a modern architecture, modern stack, because we are seeing other products evolve and they have been evolving for a while, and formidable opponents and that are starting to kind of show up to the channel.
And I think so. And you can look at it if you look at their P&L, what percentage of their P&L, and I looked this up the other day, which is why I know it. 10% of their revenue is R&D. Well, average SaaS company is 20 to 25%. So, what you're saying is objectively true based on their investments in the past 10 years relative to other SaaS businesses that are in your head. Like, this is what SaaS innovation looks like. And there's no secret. Yep. You can't, squeeze more blood from a stone if you're not pouring money into the top line. So you're going to innovate faster if you do two things. You have more engineers or you acquire more companies. Like pick one. Really.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, maybe we move on to some other big news that's happened in the past week, and that's Amazon announcing a new service called AWD, which is Amazon Warehousing and Distribution. It's a service that is going to offer its warehousing, distribution, and fulfillment service to merchants. And the interesting part, or the catch, or the value prop, this is for orders placed outside of Amazon's marketplace being fulfilled by Amazon. So basically taking on the entire e-commerce fulfillment 3PL space. So, Rick, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are in this, on this move by Amazon, and if you see brands, flocking to the service or cautiously evaluating it.
Yeah, I think there are two big use cases that I think will help Amazon in the short term. And I think those will overcome kind of the popular perception of like, oh, I don't want to give everything to Amazon. I think there are two scenarios that are the most important in the short term. Number one is FBA replenishment. A lot of 3PLs are not good at it, don't want to do it. They're not making money on it. And I think brands need it and 3PLs don't want to do it. And so that's low-hanging fruit from Amazon from my point of view.
So the prep work and the distribution work,
100%.
Getting it all ready to go into the network.
100%. And so I think it is if you just kind of look at the fulfillment journey Amazon has been on since 2005, you kind of go back to like, why are they in fulfillment at all? It's because third parties suck at fulfillment, period, on their own. And the service compared to Amazon is terrible. And their job is to reduce variance. Period. I wrote about this morning. Like, reducing variance is the number one goal of almost any supply chain leader, as you know, Nanad and Dan. And so that's their job. And where's the next huge source of variance? It's FBA replenishment. That's a huge source. And then two is, to your point, to the point of FBA in general, for the past at least 3 to 5 years, and probably more, almost every brand I talk to is at their FBA limits. They can't get any more space, even if they wanted to. And so some of them are even like acquiring brands to like doing like
get more space,
financial gymnastics to get more space, and having to optimize what goes in there and when, and Amazon doing the opposite, trying to move out, keep raising rates to move out slow movers. That is a lot of friction, and Amazon does not like friction. Amazon likes things smooth. And so I think if they can cut off all that overhead between Amazon on Amazon's side and Amazon things in terms of like kind of Kaizen, like continuous improvement. And if there's like any little friction between those things, Amazon is going to try to eliminate it, as long as it has the eventual goal of making sure that this item is in stock just 5% more than their competition, then Amazon wins, because Amazon is caring about that 5% that they're losing through the replenishment process. Like, just talking about just one aspect.
Right.
Yeah. And also there is additional revenue opportunity on top of that. While you can solve for your own problem, build this infrastructure, because it's not going to be infrastructure just dedicated to AWD, right? This new infrastructure should be focused on doing FBA as well. So AWD might just be a corner of a larger building where replenishments are no longer moving between buildings. They could just be moving between one side of the building
Right.
to the other side of the building, right? Like, you will start seeing, to that point you made about the friction, right? And Amazon wants things to be simple. Things as they should come into the Amazon network needs to be prepped. It needs the right label. It needs to have the FNSKU on it or the ASIN reflected on it. All of these requirements that they have is to find greater efficiency downstream as they process. Now, when you go to a traditional 3PL and say, you need to make me Amazon compliant, you have to work with Amazon's APIs. Notoriously complex, and they have done some really good job lately in producing SP APIs, or the seller platform APIs, that have made things a little easier. But very few 3PLs have been able to automate that entire process of FBA prep, generating FBA labels, and then sending it out. So it's all manual. It's fraught with errors. So by the time it actually ends up in an Amazon warehouse, the merchant's paying for a penalty. So you're solving for that while taking that chapter out of the playbook that Amazon's used over years, right? Like the AWS playbook. If they can succeed with this, they could become a serious multi-basket fulfillment solution across multiple channels. Things that, we could dream of,
Yeah.
they are able to pull it off. So
And by the way, like, look, it's not like logistics is a high margin business. In fact, storing items in the warehouse and shipping them out. If you take away the label, there's no margin anywhere. Like literally, there's no margin in the whole process. But FBA prep, that's the only source of margin left. Like if you're a 3PL, you're like, well, at least if I'm going to do this work that I don't want to do, I'm going to charge this convenience fee for it. And Amazon is looking at this. It's like, well, thank you. I'll take that too. It's just classic right out of their playbook.
Exactly. And the margin resides in higher volume, higher throughput, right? Like, so if you talk about picking and packing versus, like, of course you can arbitrage the transportation and on the label make some money. But when it comes to pick and pack, it all comes down to efficiency. And efficiency is gained with more volume you can have. And Amazon's, again, with their own infrastructure, if they can start pushing 15, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 orders from a single facility, the capital investment that's necessary to bring in automation that drives additional efficiency, they can make it actually profitable. Pick and pack can be profitable, but you require real scale. And Amazon, when it comes to scale,
Exactly.
we all know about it. So yeah, not
No,
a concern.
for sure. And
there.
I think the other side of the equation for AWD is buy with Prime. And so look at what Amazon is trying to do. Let's go back to the genesis of buy with Prime. Off Amazon, e-commerce is growing faster than Amazon, period. End of story, for the past at least 3 or 4 years. And Amazon does not want that trend to continue indefinitely. And so I think kind of looking at how do we go to market? Could we go to market in the UK? They went to market as a carrier. Yeah, I'm sure, I haven't heard like big results from it, moderately successful. They had a prototype that they rolled out in California and a few other places to roll out directly as a carrier that they canceled during the pandemic, understandably. And I think, do we want to fight UPS and FedEx at their strength? Does that make any sense? Let's go where we have some leverage. What is the biggest leverage of Amazon? Prime. So how can we roll a struggling, I would say relatively struggling Amazon payment service, plus huge parcel opportunity, plus huge unused fulfillment space? The 6-page memo writes itself, as far as I'm concerned, with the buy with Prime opportunity.
And maybe so I've done my research on buy with Prime, but I think, Rick, you are much closer to it, and this is an amazing subject to kind of get into, just for the audience, like a snippet of what is buy with Prime, your perspective. How does a merchant use it? There is some confusion around it, so if you could help, because I think it's only invitees, or you got to go on a list or something.
So
at this point,
I think there are a couple of restrictions on buy with Prime. Number one is Amazon is equipping and training agencies, in particular like website development agencies, to implement buy with Prime. And what is buy with Prime? Is essentially 2 things. It's a buy button. It's promotions. People forget about the second part. It's promotions, and it's an availability promise, all within one compact package of JavaScript that lives on right now on a product page of the website, but I think in the future other places to be accommodating carts and things like that. But essentially, you see buy with Prime on a product page below the add to cart button. You will get this product in 2 days. And if there's a relevant Amazon promotion for this item, it will also appear on the cart, because we've actually seen that. For instance, like, get 10% off because this is a lightning deal. So Amazon will surface the relevant promotion on the website, not just on Amazon, which I think is an interesting thing. So
website being like Shopify, right? Like, so it will show up on Shopify's product page, that there is a lightning deal and you can do an add to cart, which is Shopify, or you can do buy with Prime. So you got pretty much two add to cart buttons
100%.
on the same page.
Yep. And the requirement for doing that is, it's very simple. You have to store your items with Amazon.
So it's the AWD service, right? So basically, it's fulfilling an order placed outside of Amazon using the Buy with Prime button fulfilled by Amazon.
Yeah. And if you think about Amazon Marketplace is, I would say, relative to a lot of e-commerce, particularly things at FBA, these are fast movers. And so if you have a new service that requires it to be an Amazon infrastructure, and that's your point of leverage, then if you think of the average BigCommerce or Shopify site, there's not fast movers. There's like maybe one SKU that's a fast mover. And so what happens to the 99% of your selection that you can't put on Buy with Prime? So that's a huge opportunity miss if they don't have a service like AWD.
Exactly. And so, okay. So Shopify, let's stick to that, right? So now I'm a Shopify merchant and I have this logo on there, right? Or it says buy with Prime or checkout. Shopify has Shop Pay. And Shopify, if I'm not mistaken, at the lowest tier is like 2.9% of the transaction and 30 cents on each transaction that they charge, right? And that goes through when you go through that checkout experience. How does the Buy with Prime experience look like, and where does Shopify sit in this entire situation?
So right now, Shopify is sitting. It's almost in a little bit of a passive aggressive situation where they have not definitively, from a corporate perspective, put any kind of hard press against Amazon on this. The head of Toby has said, we welcome what Amazon is doing from a terms of service. It's technically against Shopify's terms of service, and they will warn you about it if you try to install Buy with Prime. But they don't block it. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, although they could block it, as an engineer, as any sufficiently creative engineer could work around it. Now, the average merchant couldn't do it, but an agency could if they really put their mind to it. They put a CMS in the middle, or they, write a wrapper JavaScript library that calls Buy with Prime on the back end that Shopify can't see because it's a server-side call. So there are various ways around it that even Amazon could do. Obviously, they could spoof. they could do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, if Shopify makes it easy or hard is an important point, I think, for the world, because the volume of merchants there. What I think is going to be more interesting is where's the parser volume? The parser volume is not generally at these small Shopify brands. It's at the big retailers. And so the question is are there big retailers that are going to adopt Buy with Prime that are going to make a difference from a volume point of view? And I think that gets a little bit lost in kind of the Shopify situation.
Yeah, at that point, I think the bigger concern is going to be around the larger 3PLs, right? That if the retailers start doing Buy with Prime in embedded, and now you are moving your logistics to Amazon, that's where the larger 3PLs, some of the big names that we have mentioned without mentioning, are definitely going to start batting an eyebrow, because I don't think you can compete. You literally cannot outbuild what Amazon has done at this point. You just have to innovate in other ways, but being able to infrastructure compete with Amazon,
my
it's
friend
take
Dave
a
Glick,
lot.
who incidentally, he and I are speaking in about 2 weeks at ASCM in Chicago, and he likes to say that Amazon used to think about how many UPSs are we going to build this year?
Yep.
And the reason you could say that is because UPS is spending about $4 billion in CapEx a year, and Amazon is spending 20. And that disparity is only going to keep getting wider and wider. So it's
exactly. And just the Shopify buy with Prime dichotomy of that entire situation and taking the revenues kind of away from Shopify, while Shopify has Shop Promise and Shopify Logistics, right? Like there is that other side of that to try and compete with these situations. My personal take is not going to be enough. Of course, it creates choices. I
yeah.
don't
I mean,
think it
look,
is
I
enough.
think Shopify is far away from having any kind of optimized logistics network, even if you just use their publicly released stats, which is like the last earning call or the one before it. Shopify says, well, now Harley, I think, released this stat saying 80% of parcels in Shopify Fulfillment Network, which is probably a very small number, but still, even putting that to the side, get to the consumer in 2 days. 80%. Like you worked,
That means
you
you have
worked,
one warehouse in the Midwest.
you worked in Target, Nanad. What does that mean in terms of the consumer experience? If 80%, where does that fall? If you put the top carriers and their performance, where would Shopify rank?
So, I'll answer it a different way. What we have found, and so Dan and I, from our experiences, we always believed that 2 day was the promise that everyone needs to deliver. That's table stakes, right? And when we build fulfillment networks, we always build to the 2 day network, and that requires 2 warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. But what we found is the long-term value of a customer can actually be controlled when you have brand control, right? Like, so if your brand is so unique, right? So if you're a Shopify merchant that you are so unique, your customers are okay with a 5 day and a 7 day delivery if it's free. They are completely comfortable with it. And we have seen that over and over again. We got a few merchants. We have a jewelry merchant, right? Like that does exactly the same thing. But when it comes to general merchandise, yeah, there is absolutely 2 days is literally the minimum at this point. I ordered a Philips razor yesterday on Amazon, and the expectation it better be here today, right? Like, and even on Shopify, if I'm buying general merchandise where I have an option, I will abandon the cart on Shopify and go purchase somewhere else because I need that product immediately, or at least I think I need the product immediately. And that's the experience from a Target standpoint as well. Everything is 2 days, and if not 1 day. That is pretty much the baseline experience, and the consumer expectation in general merchandise is way different than brand. And if you have more of a brand command, it's a
And
slightly different
I agree
experience.
with you 100% here. And I think that's actually, if you listen to Toby, he'll say the same thing. The CEO of Shopify, he'll say the same thing. It's like the world wants to create this narrative where we're competing with each other. But I think Shopify has, there's a little bit of a dichotomy here where the world will paint them as competitive, but the average Shopify brand isn't trying to compete with a big retailer experience. They're not.
Yeah,
And they don't need to.
absolutely not.
They don't need to
Yep.
deliver. You don't need to deliver same day from a direct to consumer brand website. And the reason is they don't, even if they could, they don't want to, because that would cut out their distribution channels. Right? So
Exactly.
they would kill their best customers,
Exactly.
and they're never going to do there. So I think Toby's broader point is actually true in that there's more white space for both to play in, that both free. On one hand, not only is there white space because of what I just mentioned, you don't want to compete with your top retail distribution channels. So the other reason that there's white space is that Shopify tends to be smaller merchants that want these personalized brand experiences. And so as a result, what's important? Unboxing, the branding of the box, the inserts, the personalized attention, the note in the box that is signed by somebody who QC'd it for it. Does the average 3PL want to do that? You can't
I absolutely do not.
you can't automate
No.
any of that stuff.
You can't scale that out.
You can't scale it out.
I mean, I don't know the newest numbers from Shopify, but at one point, someone from Shopify, long time ago, told me something like 95% of Shopify merchants do less than 10 orders a day. And so you take that kind of, Amazon's current infrastructure. You already said they got their own infrastructure. They have capacity constraints to put all the inventory that needs to go into the Amazon, warehousing network, into FBA, into a fulfillment network. You translate that into Shopify merchant space. The amount of immaturity within some of that merchant space creates so much excess purchase that if Shopify logistics was just to take that inventory, they will be in the business of liquidation before they will be in the business of doing logistics, right? That's the fundamental problem. And guess what? Amazon owns the infrastructure. They got no one else to pay for in between the Shopify logistics. As much as, we are a software company, we want asset light. That's not a good thing in this space. You have to own it, because now you are already in a hyper competitive market, which is a race to the bottom. You are creating 2 stacks of margin. You are acting as a 4PL. You got to pay the 3PL, and you got to make sure you stay profitable. Who loses? The merchant.
Yeah, I think,
My
look,
opinion
I
on
think
this.
there's no way around the fact that you have 2 stacks of margin. There's literally no way. I mean, and I think that is where Amazon has that waiting game, where they're saying,
Yep.
in that, like, look, yeah, maybe brands like you, but in the long term, economics will win and service levels will win.
Exactly.
And that's been Amazon's bet for 15 years, and it's a pretty good bet. Now, there's the other side of the coin is, Amazon, the brand is not Amazon's customer. They're not. They don't care about the brand. To Amazon, a brand is a vendor. The customer is the customer. And so that is really the single point of differentiation that Shopify can hang their hat on, which I think works for a large percentage of the market, and especially for the big guys. But for instance, like someone like AEO and Quiet is trying to say, like, okay, Shopify isn't going to go where we are because we're not Amazon volume, but American Eagle is not shabby. And so they're trying to play that playbook in some sense, optimized for retail distribution, not necessarily only direct to consumer, although Quiet has a pretty good reputation there too. But on a smaller scale and medium scale compared to Amazon scale, put it that way.
I thank you for actually bringing that up, because Dan and I actually talk a lot about this particular subject with American Eagle, and what are they doing? They are just building another 3PL, right? But you got to look at the intricacies of the technology that they are developing and owning the infrastructure along the journey while doing it. Of course, it's remotely nowhere close to Amazon scale. But what is being done when you bring in and pull in this network and own the infrastructure yourself, you do create a formidable network. So that point of, like, when we were talking about Amazon warehousing and distribution, like, what do retailers do? I think the first stop along the journey might be the Quiet platform solution before they say, okay, I've pretty much grown out and now I got to go to Amazon, right? Like, that's kind of where I see that journey evolving. I don't know if American Eagle's networks being developed to address the mid and smaller market merchants.
I totally agree.
Whatsoever, right?
I totally agree. And by the way, they're not going to go there because it's not a, like you said, it's not a profitable segment. Like,
unless you are building a solution where you are going after product valuation and you can claim, like, I have 35,000 merchants in my network that do 2 orders a day. The VC game loves that stuff. But when you look at the actual, actual, the P&Ls, I don't think they look as
I think
interesting at that
that's
point.
there are two big Shopify problems they're going to have in the long term of the implementation. Is number one is if 90, like, let's just use your numbers for a second. They may not be the right numbers. 95% of Shopify merchants do less than 10 orders a day. What percentage of those merchants churn every year? At least a third.
Yeah.
At least a third.
Yeah.
I bet it's closer to 50 in that segment,
Agreed.
but it's at least a third. Yeah. And so you've run a 3PL before. What's the cost of onboarding a merchant that churns in 6 months?
It's painful.
So painful. Yeah, like Dan is just getting indigestion thinking about it. I can see it on his face.
I am because you invest, you're investing in that brand, right? You're placing your bet on them that they're going to be successful, or it's almost like a portfolio, an investment strategy, right? At least 30% have to be successful or you're screwed because you just put all that time and energy into onboarding and you never recoup your money back.
And that works for Shopify in the software space because their software is so easy. Someone can sign up in a weekend. If I want to, I could start a Shopify store in about 30 minutes while we're on this podcast. However, Shopify is a software company. Who are they really screwing over? Their 3PL partners, because they're going to be eating this cost. Do you think they're going to charge that back to Shopify and Shopify is going to accept that cost? No way.
Nope.
Yeah. So it goes back to
So I think Shopify is going to have to own their infrastructure long term. They're just going to take the long way around.
I wholeheartedly agree. That's the one thing. I've been saying this for a while, like Shopify should own the infrastructure. And I know Toby's pretty much outright come out and said the big difference between, they had choices when going out to the market and should it be delivered, should it be something else? And it was, again, perception wise, it was more like, we want asset light. That's amazing. But you just bought a marketplace fulfillment solution while you are a brand centric fulfillment. So I mean, there are certain things to be said around that, right? So from a deliver acquisition, it's like, okay, pretty cool, asset light, but their roots are Walmart.com, right? Like it's designed for marketplace. It's FBA network that you bought and not a true brand centric fulfillment solution. Because if you look at the successful Shopify fulfillment services that are out there today, they don't split inventory in more than 2 locations, while Deliver starts with a minimum of 4 in most cases.
And the average item per order is like 1.2, 1.3, right? Very marketplace like outbound volume.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some adjustment of the network that's going to come, and there's a bunch of really smart people out there. So I'm sure they'll figure it out. But
well, for a $2 billion
it's
acquisition,
going to be an interesting journey,
right? I mean, $4
billion acquisition.
$4 billion acquisition.
What? I thought it was 2.1.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I thought it was 2.1, but yeah, that's
when you're in that range. When you're in that range, it's just a huge number, right? Number. And again, it's asset light, it's tech.
Yeah. No, 100%. And so I think Shopify has really 2 choices long term. Short term, I understand why they started with SFN. They couldn't scale it on their own, probably because of their merchant base. And so they wanted to go wide. Like, how could we cover the broadest number of people and to allow the next level of learning? Okay, $2 billion may be over, maybe could be paying more or less than that, but they have the capability. They're in the game, they're learning. To me, this is Shopify's mindset right now. Like, how can I do the next level of learning? And for them, $2 billion, maybe a year ago, or maybe they'd be happy to have back now, if their stock or something, but that's their choice. And so if long-term, the economics are going to mean that they need to own, I think we've pretty much, it's very hard to refute that. It's hard to establish that. That's one major path. The other major path is actually in the opposite direction. It's not just asset light. It's almost connectivity only. To me, if you treat the world of supply chain services like an app store, and say if you look, what is one of the biggest friction points that merchants have with the 3PL is there are a lot of old, terrible 3PLs out there that want you to connect through FTP or EDI or Google Sheets or like I've seen everything, and I've seen you.
Yep.
I'm sure you've seen it all too. So, and the brand is like, what does this even mean? And Shopify could solve all those problems, and every 3PL would run to them to integrate to their solution. As long as I could go to Shopify's app store, click one button, and now I'm integrated to any 3PL in North America. And that would not require any acquisition.
Or start, putting your WMS, right? Like, so they definitely with their SFN network, they built something, start providing that to the 3PLs. That's one direction, of course, right? And the other is they got to build something of their own.
Yeah.
I agree.
The WMS question is it's another tricky one because who else is selling to the 3PLs? 6 River Systems.
Yep. Which I don't understand what was the rationale or thought process. Someday it will come out. But
so they're selling to the 3PLs. In the meantime, Shopify is trying to put them on which 3PL? Maybe not the same one. So there's
Shopify logistics.
Yeah, there's some friction there that I think will have to be resolved.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the pillars on the Shopify logistics side of things, right? It just does not come across, at least today, as a cohesive strategy. I'm sure there is, some big brain power being utilized out there, and we can't see through the 3D chess that is being played, right? But someday we'll all understand it. But at this point, I struggle.
Exactly. So. I mean, and if you look at the markets, just like who's 6 Rivers customer? Like, let's just talk about like 3 minutes before the acquisition, who is 6 River trying to sell to? Huge brands and retailers, because that's where the volume is. Yep. And that's, literally the opposite of Shopify's customer.
Right. That's 5 to 10% of it, right?
That's, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, just to touch on that SFN part, right? The thought process was, you mentioned something around how SFN, from a network development standpoint, they thought it would be easy. And I think one of the things that they thought is getting into physical infrastructure execution is the same as software development. Like, I can just add a feature. You can't just add a feature inside a building. When you need to now start doing a special type of kitting, or this customer wants their triangle box versus this other customer that wants a purple box, because you can't do the Amazon experience. You can't do just brown boxes when it comes to Shopify. Shopify merchants are extremely unique, and that brand experience is super critical to them. And that just adds this layers and layers and layers and layers of complexities. And we have done this. We have done this many, many, many times, myself and Dan, and I've seen how much complexity it brings, and it's really hard to do. And you can't have the mixing of basket experience that Amazon does. I mean, Amazon just sits in a really good position from what they have ended up building. A marketplace is much different than what we are doing with brands. So
yeah, and I think so. The only way to do that is like, how do you make a higher margin, low volume business work in logistics? That is really the critical question for Shopify.
Absolutely.
On that note, Rick, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and definitely want to give you an opportunity to let everyone know how they could follow you, how they could learn more about your consulting practice, and again, highly recommend that everyone check out the Watson Weekly podcast as well.
For your weekly listening, guys. And it has been a pleasure, by the way, Rick. I love talking to you, man. As soon as it was like, it's time to talk to Rick, it's like, what should we not talk about? Because there is so much we can talk about. I'm sure you're going to be a repeat guest. Loved the conversation. So yeah, how do people follow you?
Yeah, people can follow me. Search for me on LinkedIn, Rick Watson. My website, rmwcommerce.com. And, my podcast, just go on Apple Podcasts or Google or Pocket or anything. Search for the Watson Weekly and get your e-commerce digest every Monday morning.
Love
Fantastic.
it. Love it. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.